Sweet.
Do you have somebody?
Finals.
Oh, you do, okay.
All right, I'm out. I'm good. I don't have to get sick anymore.
Oh, unless you want to come tonight.
She seems sad.
I want to bring it tonight.
You know,
Last week she couldn't get my arm, remember?
Yes.
I have to
I'm
wait.
sorry, sweetie. I'm sorry.
So chapter 17 talks about the immune system and different medications that can affect our immune system.
of course, there's lots of them.
Of course, there's so many medications for every single thing you do.
I know.
So I found this interesting video. I don't think he takes one breath through the whole thing, but he's pretty smart guy. And he goes pretty quick, but he's got a lot of good stuff. So we'll talk about it again after that. But
you may not know it, but your body is engaged in a never-ending battle.
you've met
You are
this guy
literally
before.
covered in staph and strep and E. coli and all sorts of dubious characters that are intent on using you and your body's many resources to feed themselves, find shelter, and reproduce as much as they want. And hey, we all gotta make a living, but it is not your job to give these guys a free lunch. So your body has developed a three-part policy toward these shady customers, and its enforcement is handled by your immune system. The immune system is different from all the other systems we've talked about this year in that it's not a specific tissue, organ, system kind of system. Instead, it involves a whole bunch of different tissue groups, organ systems, and specialized but widely distributed defense cells. Together, this league of extraordinary substances joins forces to perform all of the defense functions your body depends on to keep you alive in an incredibly germy world. And the first line of defense in this never-ending battle, that's your innate or non-specific defense system. Like your average frontline soldier is prepared to immediately engage with anyone suspicious, and it mostly includes stuff we were born with, like the external barricades of your skin and mucous membranes, and internal defenses like phagocytes, antimicrobial proteins, and other attack cells. But some enemies must be fought with special forces, and here your body can deploy your adaptive or specific defense system, which is more like your SEAL Team 6. It takes more time to call in, but it's specially designed to go after specific targets, and it keeps files on those bad guys so it knows how to handle them next time around. But today we're going to focus on your innate system and look at how it uses an arsenal of physical and chemical barriers, killer cells, and even fever to keep you healthy, proving that sometimes the symptoms we associate with illness are actually the signs that we're healing. Simple doesn't mean that it can't be elegant. I mean, your body is capable of some incredibly sophisticated things, including defending itself from infection. But occasionally, there's something to be said for brute force, and a lot of your innate immune system's functions aren't exactly subtle. For example, your body's very first line of defense, it's a simple physical barrier, and it works. Like a wall around a fortress, your skin does a fantastic job of keeping out all manner of malevolent microorganisms. As long as that tough, keratinized epithelial membrane doesn't get torn open or busted up too much, you could probably, make snowballs out of raw sewage and still be all right. Although, no. Your many mucous membranes also provide a handy physical barrier. You'll remember that they align any cavity that opens up into the germy outside world, including the respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive tracts. Not only do your skin and mucosa supply simple physical protection, they also pack some serious chemical weaponry. Eat some questionable leftovers for lunch? Don't worry, your stomach is literally filled with acid, so you probably are covered. Walk face first into your coworker's nasty sneeze cloud? No worries, your nasal passages can whip up a tissue box worth of sticky mucus to help trap viruses before they enter your lungs. You've also got bacteria-fighting enzymes in your saliva and lacrimal eye fluid, and peptides called defensives in your skin and membrane that help keep bacteria and fungi from setting up shop around inflamed or scraped skin, which no matter how careful you are, you're gonna get one way or another. Maybe you shave with a dull blade, or you just brush your teeth too hard, and don't get me started about the dangers of bagel cutting. So when you've reached that first simple line of defense, it's time to call on your second line of internal innate defenses. This is where your body starts pulling strategic maneuvers like firing up a fever, releasing chemical signals, causing inflammation, or other defensive tactics that help identify and attack infectious invaders. Some of the first defensive cells on the scene are your phagocytes. Their name literally means to eat, and like Pac-Man, they indiscriminately chase down intruders and gobble them up. And they come in a few different varieties. First, you got neutrophils, which are the most abundant type of your white blood cells. They kind of self-destruct after devouring a pathogen, and in fact, you've probably seen piles of their little dead bodies, because that's what pus is made of. But the bigger, tougher phagocytes are the macrophages. They're derived from monocyte white blood cells that have moved out of the bloodstream to occupy tissues, and some are free types that patrol tissues looking for creepers, while others are fixed, attached to fibers in specific organs, devouring anything suspicious that passes by. So when a macrophage, in say the finger I just cut slicing a bagel, sees a new bacterium coming along, it snares it using cytoplasmic extensions, reels it in, completely engulfs it, and essentially digests it and spits the rest out. And unlike neutrophils, it can do this over and over again, like a boss. But not all your defense cells are phagocytic. You've also got cells with what is by far the awesomest name of any cell in the body, the natural killer cells. You can call them NK cells if you want to, but like, why would you do that? Anyway, these tiny assassins patrol your blood and lymph looking for abnormal cells and are unique in that they can kill your own cells if they are infected with viruses or have become cancerous. How can they tell? A normal, healthy human cell contains a special protein on its surface called MHC1, or major histocompatibility complex. But if it's infected, it stops making that protein. And if an NK cell detects a defective cell, it doesn't swallow it whole like a macrophage. It pokes it with an enzyme that triggers apoptosis, or programmed cell death. Pretty awesome. So those are some ways your innate immune cells handle their enemies, but how do they know where to look in the first place? So let's talk strategery. So say you're in a banana factory and you slip on a banana peel and you scrape your knees. Your outer fortress has been breached and the pathogens are just flooding in like orcs through Helm's Deep. Banana factories are very dirty places. Now your body wants to contain the spread of pathogens, clean up the mess, and get healing as quickly as possible. So it cues up your inflammatory response. This is basically an internal fire alarm, only it uses chemicals instead of sirens to get the message across, and instead of smoke and fire, you sense redness, swelling, heat, and pain. For example, in the event of injury, specialized mast cells in your connective tissue send out histamine molecules, and histamine is great at calling in the cavalry. For one thing, it causes vasodilation, which creates redness and heat at the site of the injury. Now, those things might freak you out a little, but they're actually signs of healing. The increased temperature, for example, ratchets up the cell's metabolic rate so they can repair themselves faster. Meanwhile, histamines and other inflammatory chemicals also increase the permeability of blood vessels, causing nearby capillaries to release protein-rich fluids. This causes swelling, which again is actually a good thing because that leaked protein helps clot blood and form scabs, while the lymphatic system sucks up and filters that extra fluid, cleaning it up before putting it back into your bloodstream. And of course, like chum to sharks, an inflamed knee is also going to attract a bunch of local phagocytes, which find it easier to escape your now leaky capillaries, and lymphocytes that are also flowing freely, helping to destroy pathogens while also cleaning up dead cell wreckage. And don't forget, during all of this, the neutrophils have been doing their best, but they were the first wave to arrive, so by this time, they're starting to die in heaps. They're triggered when the injured knee skin cells release chemicals that begin leukocytosis, the release of neutrophils from the bone marrow, where they're made, into the bloodstream. To attract the neutrophils to the damaged area, inflamed endothelial cells in the capillaries send out chemicals that act like homing devices. And when the neutrophils arrive, they cling to the capillary walls near the injury, flatten themselves out, and squeeze through the vessel walls to get to work. Your big monocytes eventually roll up to the battle and transform into hungry macrophages, replacing the first line of now dead neutrophils and basically just eating up any lingering enemies and then cleaning up the carnage. Now, all this works pretty well in most circumstances, but you may have noticed with a more major injury or an especially nasty virus or infection, sometimes your local troops get overrun. When white blood cells and macrophages run into more foreign invaders than they can handle, they let loose pyrogen chemicals that tap the hypothalamus and raise your body's thermostat, calling in a systemic fever to burn everything. The resulting temperature rise increases the metabolism of your cells so they can heal faster, and it also tells the liver and spleen to hold on to all of their iron and zinc so those things can't contribute to bacterial growth. But even then, sometimes you find yourself facing a more formidable foe. That's when you call in the specialists, your adaptive immune defenses. And to learn exactly how they save the day, you have to watch next time. But for now, you learn that your immune system's responses begin with physical barriers like skin and mucous membranes, and when they're not enough, there are your phagocytes, the neutrophils and macrophages. You also learned about natural killer cells and the inflammatory response, and watch as all...
Yeah, he has like 3 parts. I was like, should I make them sit through all 3 of them? And I thought, maybe not, because
He doesn't breathe.
I was like, I can imagine having him as a teacher. He just
It's
goes,
a lot of
goes,
information,
goes.
and you're trying to absorb it all, but trying to listen to them at the same time, and it's like, I
Yeah,
don't catch it all.
yeah.
He's good though. I mean, knows his stuff.
Yeah, he does, but man, he goes fast. So
I don't think he breathes.
no, I was like, I wonder how many times he pauses that. while he's
I don't
doing
think he did pause. I don't think he swallowed the whole
Well, I
time.
think like he
you know?
has to like press pause or something while he's recording, because who could, unless he's like a swimmer, maybe he's a swimmer and he.
There towards the end, it's like, I don't think he's swallowing. I mean, how is
No.
he doing that? You know, it's like,
It's a superpower.
he knows his stuff though.
So, our skin is usually our first line of defense against any type of microorganisms or anything, because as long as it's intact skin and there's no breaks in it, it kind of protects us from everything. So the immune response is if an antigen was to invade our body, so that'd be like a microbe or foreign substance, then our body would respond by attacking that antigen. So inflammation would help to limit the spread of microbes. Signs of inflammation, that's redness, swelling, heat, and pain. Those are the big signs that you see when you see inflammation. The first phase of our immune response, that's when they release the bradykinin, which is the vasodilator that releases the pain. And complement is a protein that destroys the antigens. Histamine and leukotrienes are chemicals that are released by the mast cells, and they cause smooth muscle contraction, blood vessel dilation, and then the itching, because if you ever have like an allergic thing, you feel like itchy all over. And then prostaglandins, they attract the leukocytes, and then those are the ones that cause the pain. So bad. Good and bad, I guess. So it's helping to fight it off. So then the second phase launches an attack through the body by secreting antibodies. Antibodies are the immunoglobulins that fight the antigens. And then also you have B cells, which are your memory cells, and those kind of remember that attacker so that next time they're already ready. So that's why, like, if people have had different diseases, they're not going to usually get that same disease again. So usually if you have like the chickenpox, you only get it the one time. Sometimes, like rare circumstances, you do get it a second time, but it's usually not as bad the second time because your body's like already ready for it. And then the T cells are the CD cells. Those are lymphocytes, and they create the cytokines. They don't produce antibodies, but these cytokines cause the inflammation, and then actually attack the invaders directly. So that's our little, like, I was looking for not that guy's video. He has a lot of good information, but I've seen one before where it's a lot slower and it's got the little army guys and they're like fighting off the infection. I couldn't find it. I don't know why. But that's kind of what I think about when I think about it, is just like we have the little soldiers in there that are like fighting off any type of infections. So the anti-inflammatory medications can help to stop or reduce the inflammatory response. So that's for people, maybe their immune system is like working overboard. So if you have an autoimmune disorder, then your immune system kind of attacks itself. So that'd be like with the rheumatoid arthritis, also the Crohn's disease, Hashimoto's, spondylitis. All of those are autoimmune disorders where your immune system's kind of attacking itself. It doesn't realize that you have good stuff in there, so that it's attacking it like it's bad, and it's really not. So we take medications to kind of calm that down. And then also we take anti-inflammatory medications if you have like an allergic reaction. So Benadryl is like the big one that everybody usually takes if it's a mild reaction, like pollen's a big one around here that gets everybody. Usually maybe you could take some type of antihistamine like a Zyrtec. Some people take Zyrtec or Claritin every day. Or Benadryl. Say if you're feeling like itchy all over, people will take the Benadryl, or some type of mild allergic reaction. People will take that also. And so antihistamines, they just block the histamine response. So they relax your respiratory, vascular, and gastrointestinal smooth muscles. So that's another thing when people have like a really bad allergic reaction. Usually the swelling can even be like in their tongue and their throat. So that helps to relax all of that too. I always think about my girl when the little boy gets stung by the bee, and he would have needed probably like the EpiPen, but yeah, so Benadryl kind of helps with relaxing everything too. But yeah, I don't know, every time we talk about allergic reactions, I think but and then steroids or steroid like compounds like the glucocorticoids, they suppress your inflammatory response. So topical, people have all probably heard of like the hydrocortisone cream that you put on if you have itching, some type of dermatitis or something that's bothering your skin. You can also do intranasal medications. That Flovent, people take that. Sometimes people take that just like once a day just to help them kind of breathe better and prevent kind of help to suppress the inflammatory response there too. Some serious side effects of immunosuppressant medications. Obviously, you're not going to be able to fight off different infections as easily if you're suppressing your immune system. So that's one of the, and then they can also, some immunosuppressants can be kind of toxic to like your kidneys too. So another thing, a lot of people that have had like organ transplants, they have to take a immunosuppressant for like the rest of their life because they can't, their body will try to attack that organ because it sees it as an outsider or like an invader. So they're at high risk for getting, infections because they're taking these immunosuppressants that kind of suppress their immune system. So it's kind of everything in our body is like a fine line. We don't want too much, we don't want too little. Yeah. So nasal decongestants, they also help with like a allergic reaction. They can dry secretions to help with get rid of the nasal congestion. And an example of that would be like the Tizine. That's a nasal medication that kind of helps to dry those secretions out, or you can take something orally that also would help with that. And then you have NSAIDs. Those are the anti-inflammatory medications that don't have any steroids. They're non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So that's like your ibuprofen, naproxen, like Aleve, Motrin. Also, Celebrex. Celebrex is one that they give people a lot if they've had surgery. They'll usually take that afterwards, and that helps with the inflammation of the surgery. Sometimes IV medications, Toradol, that's a big one that they'll give people a lot of times in the hospital. That Toradol, one thing about that I learned along the way was you can't give it to anybody that has any type of kidney problems because it can actually make those worse and put them into kidney failure. So it's really nice because it's not an opioid and you can give it through the IV, so it works really quickly and it helps with pain and inflammation, but you just want to make sure they don't have that history first. So NSAIDs are usually the most common treatment for inflammation. Some of them they also have the antipyretics, so they help with reducing your fever too. So that's why a lot of times people take like ibuprofen if they have a fever. Usually alternate it with the Tylenol because the Tylenol would just have the antipyretic and not the inflammation. And then, so they inhibit the prostaglandin synthesis, which is responsible for your pain, fever, and inflammation. So it helps with pain and fever and inflammation. So they're kind of nice little magic. Oh, most of them, a lot of them are over the counter stuff, but. So immunosuppressants, usually you can use it for long-term therapy for those autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. That cyclosporin or the Imurin are two common ones they use for that. And then psoriasis, that's another example. You might need some type of medication to help with all that inflammation and irritated skin. So that's another cyclosporin. Crohn's disease, Imurin is one that they take for that, or the azithromycin. So usually they're used with other therapies. That way they're not as prone to getting infections. And then also there can be some cancers that are caused by long-term suppression of the immune system too. So another risk. It's always something. So Toradol is an example of, NSAIDs. So you have your anti-infective medications. So that's like the antibiotics, antifungals, antivirals, parasitics, antitoxins. So it just kind of depends on what they're classified by their action. So they target the processes of the disease-causing microorganisms or the pathogenics. So antibiotics, there's first ones. Those are for the bacteria. So if you have a bacterial infection like pneumonia, you might take an antibiotic. And they're usually named based on their shape and their ability to retain stains. So usually when if you did like a culture, say if you had like a urinary tract infection and they sent it to the lab and they did a culture and sensitivity, first they would probably tell you if it was a gram-positive or gram-negative bacteria. And then they would send you this like sensitivity chart that would tell you what antibiotics it would be susceptible to. So that's kind of how they would choose which ones they pick. A broad spectrum antibiotic is effective against lots of different kinds of bacteria. So if it's like a pretty bad infection or they don't want to wait for that culture and sensitivity report, they'll just give them broad spectrum, and that hopefully will cover whatever it is. They'll still do the culture and sensitivity, and if they have to change the antibiotic, they will, but at least they can get it started, because like the big thing now is sepsis. If somebody gets that really bad infection, it kind of goes into their bloodstream and it can kind of damage all their organs and even kill them really quickly. And it could come from something simple like a urinary tract infection or something like that. So they'll get them on that broad spectrum antibiotic like right away and give them lots of IV fluids and different other things to help with it. But that's one good thing about the broad spectrum, because it's good for lots of different ones. And then, so like I said, the culture and sensitivity, that identifies the bacteria and what the right antibiotic would be to use for it. And it can either be bactericidal, which kills the bacteria, or bacteriostatic, which stops it from growing. So cidal, I don't know, this is probably, hopefully this doesn't bother anybody that I say this, but I think like killing, kind of like suicidal. I don't want to say that if somebody, but I don't know. I just try to think of ways to remember, and I think cidal. And then static, it kind of like causes this static and stops it from growing. I don't know. Kind of a weird. The weird way my brain works to remember
Oh,
things.
I like it. That's how I try to remember things too.
So a super infection, that would be an infection that would take really strong antibiotics to get rid of. And the antibiotics kill the bacteria and our good flora. So the death of the bacteria that helps us fight infection allows new infections. So a lot of times if you take that really strong antibiotic and you don't take like a probiotic to kind of get the good flora back in, then you can get like yeast infections or C. diff. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but a lot of times people get that because they take the antibiotics and they don't have like the good probiotics to build it back up. I know, and when I worked in like the nursing home, we'd always, anytime anybody would get an order for antibiotic, we'd always get an order for probiotic, and we'd try to give them yogurt because yogurt has good probiotics in it. But at the hospital, they don't always do that as much. Or if you're in the office, I don't know that they always do that as much either. So that is something I always tell them, like, order yogurt on your tray. Or if you guys have people at the office, you can say, eat yogurt every day, or you can get like an over-the-counter probiotic to put the good bacteria back in.
I never had a nurse or anybody suggest that. My daughter has told me that, but nobody at the offices have ever told me when I will get yeast infections from an antibiotic. And they've never ever said, get a probiotic, counteract it, or, to.
It's supposed to help, I think.
I would say that because finally my daughter told me,
Well, to prevent it. It won't, the yogurt probably won't get rid of it. If you have a yeast infection, you'd have to take like the medication for it, but
antibiotics can give you yeast infections because
it gets rid of all the good stuff.
Yeah,
and also it can.
I wish they'd have suggested that years ago. And nobody's ever suggested that.
It can cause, like my little girl gets diarrhea with this one really strong antibiotic.
It helps with
and
that.
They tell us. But see, some of them they tell you though you gotta wait. Like you can't eat your yogurt and take your antibiotic. You gotta wait like I don't know, an hour or 2 hours or something.
Really?
Not every type, but certain ones because it counteracts the antibiotic too much.
Isn't that something?
But yeah, it'll help with that too.
Yeah, so that's cool. My daughter told me that. But I just wish they would tell you that at the clinic. I mean, it's something we could tell people too.
Especially like the C. diff is so.
Or a probiotic or something, so you don't get,
It can be so bad for people, older people. So if you can prevent it, I'm all for it.
Once you get the C. diff, don't you always have C. diff like in your system? You never fully get rid of it. Is that true?
They say it can be like colonized, I guess, is how they say it. If you take the medication, and you're no longer having like the loose stools, then they consider, that you're. But yeah, you're right that you can still test positive for it, but they consider it like colonized if you're not having the loose mucousy stools, because like the lab won't even test it if it's formed. It has to be that loose stuff, or else they'll just throw it away. Had them do that to me. Which I guess it makes sense. So penicillin is like one of the oldest antibiotics. We watched that fun little snippet on YouTube that it came from World War II, that they mass produced it. But you can take it orally. They have like a topical penicillin form, or you could do an injection. So strep throat or otitis media would be like an ear infection. That's usually, they just go for the penicillin. But there's a lot of people now that are allergic to it because it was so common. Because you can kind of develop allergies over time if you've used it more and more. Then you may get an allergy to it, so then they have to go to something else. But other forms, anything that ends with cillin is kind of in the same family. So you have amoxicillin. That's the one I always, like for kids, it seems like they jump to the amoxicillin. I think it's in the family, but maybe not quite as, people aren't just as allergic to it as the penicillin for some reason. And then ampicillin or like I said, the penicillin. And penicillin or the Cillins are all usually pretty cheap too. They're not the real expensive ones. I've bought those and like the amoxicillin, and it was, compared to the price of every other medication in the world, it's like nothing. So then you have the cephalosporins. Those are pretty similar to penicillin. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're good for people that can't take penicillin. So there's 4 different generations, and it's kind of based on their activity. So you have the like cefazolin would be like a first generation, or Ancef, Kezol, or other names for it. And they're usually for people that, like I said, they're allergic to penicillin, and they act against the gram-positive bacteria. So if you had like group B strep, you might be given like that cefazolin. And that can also, the group B strep also can cause pneumonia. So you want to get that before it gets that far. Cefazolin, that's another one that I see they'll use like prophylactically to prevent infections. A lot of people that have surgery, that's one that they always give like after surgery, cefazolin. Let's see, second generation would be like that Zinacef, and it's usually for non-scomial infections. A non-scomial infection is something that you developed in a healthcare facility, which is never good. We want to prevent that, but so they also have like healthcare associated pneumonia. That's why now they push, if you're ever in the hospital or anything, they push you to get up and walk around, or at least they turn you every 2 hours, deep breathe and cough after you have surgery. They give you that incentive spirometer to breathe in, because otherwise you could get that healthcare associated pneumonia because you're just laying in bed and everything's just kind of sitting there. Third generation cephalosporins would be like the ceftriaxone or Rocephin. That's another one that I see them use a lot. That's for gram-negative bacteria like E. coli. So usually most urinary tract infections are E. coli. That's one that they will give people a lot. It's a lot of times they'll do like an IM injection of it. Or and then fourth generation would be cefepime or maxipine. That's usually an IV that they give it through an IV route, and that's for surgical infections that you maybe have gotten in the hospital, which we try to prevent at all costs, but I guess it could happen. So that's what they usually use for that. So this group of medications, the cephalosporins, you can either use it to treat an infection or to prevent an infection. And if you do take any of these medications, you need to avoid alcohol while you're on the medications. And it can sometimes kind of make you have an upset stomach too, which is like all antibiotics, I think. But so then you have the tetracyclines. Those kind of came around in the 1950s and 60s, and some bacteria is now becoming resistant to them. So usually this class of medications prevents bacteria from making protein or protein synthesis, which interrupts the reproduction of bacteria. So doxycycline, I always think of the little picture of the dog riding a bicycle with doxycycline. That's a tetracycline. I was going to put that on there, and then it must be on my computer that I redid these PowerPoints and I saved it to my computer. And then when I got here today, I was like, this isn't what I had at home. So we don't get the cute picture of the dog. That's okay. I can upload it on the Moodle. But I just like having visuals of things. So doxycycline, minocycline, or tetracycline are all example of tetracyclines. And that's another question that I've seen is which medication causes permanent staining of your teeth of the child or fetus? That's usually the tetracycline. So where did I see that? Here it is. Which of the following drugs can discolor teeth? Tetracycline. So you may see that again. And actually tetracycline is nice because it's good against the gram-negative and gram-positive microbes. So if you weren't sure exactly if it was gram-positive or negative yet, then you could take this because it would be effective against both. Then you have the macrolides. They inhibit the reproduction of the microorganism by stopping the protein synthesis. So it's kind of like the tetracycline, kind of similar. And it can be bactericidal or bacteriostatic. So it can kill the bacteria or stop it from growing. And sometimes they'll give you that for like if you've ever had like a Z-Pack, that's like their go-to, I think, for the respiratory, like upper respiratory infection. You go to prompt care or whatever, and they're like, oh, I'll give you a Z-Pack for 5 days or 7 days. Skin infections, they do that a lot for that too, like cellulitis, pertussis, pelvic inflammatory disease. And they can also help with syphilis, strep throat, sinus infections.
What, the Z-Pack?
Yeah, like the azithromycin. So, and then you also, those are all kind of end with the iacin. So you have the erythromycin, clarithromycin, and azithromycin. Or Azithromax is the brand name. So the iacins are the macrolides. Then you have the aminoglycoside medications, and those are actually kind of more toxic than the other medications, and you have to monitor the blood levels really closely when you're on those. So gentamicin usually will do what's called like a peak and a trough if they're on like an IV gentamicin, where the peak gets it kind of while they're getting the antibiotic just to see what level it is, and then the trough is before you, like say the next day or right before the next dose, they'll do a trough, and that will kind of see, oh wait, is the level too high, we need to decrease the dose, or if it's not high enough, then they increase the dose. So that's one of those, usually like if the doctor orders that, they'll say pharmacy to dose, because the pharmacy can look at those labs and say, I think they need more or less, and they look at they'll look at their kidney function and the levels for that, and just kind of make sure that they're not getting too much of it, because it can be toxic to your kidneys. And also ototoxic means it's toxic to your ears. So if you were to have some type of symptoms like that, then it would actually, like hearing loss or sometimes ringing in the ears, you would not be able to reverse it, the ototoxicity. So that's really scary, kind of, if you think about it. So if anybody did mention any signs or symptoms, then you'd want to stop it like right away. And usually they'll use that if no other suitable anti-infective is available. So maybe they've tried other antibiotics or anti-infective medications and they didn't work, or it's like some type of super bug that's resistant to everything else, and this is the only thing that it's resistant to. Then they'll use it. And it's usually aerobic gram-negative bacteria. And sometimes they do it with eye drops. I've seen the tobramycin or gentamicin eye drops, ear drops, or as an IV injection, or IV, it says IV injection, but a lot of times like IV fluid, like IV piggyback, that's how they usually give it. then you have the quinolones, which are bacteriostatic, so they stop the bacteria from growing. And they're usually for antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So, like, the one I always think of is MRSA. It's one of those that's resistant to lots of other antibiotics, or the MDRO. We have that around here too, where MDRO is multi-drug resistant organism. So they may have to get like one of these, like the ciprofloxacin or Cipro or the ofloxacin. And usually if you have like a chronic urinary tract infection, so it just keeps coming back. And that's another thing, how they always say to take all of your antibiotic, even though a lot of times people will just be like, oh, I feel better, I don't think I need it anymore, and stop taking it. You may not have got rid of it completely, and then it kind of comes back worse. So if you take the whole antibiotic, then you can kind of prevent these super infections or antibiotic resistant infections. So that's another thing that we want to tell people is make sure you take all of it. And you always hear people, they're like, oh, I've got some penicillin in my house, I'll just take that. And it's like, why do you have that in your house? You should have took it all the first time.
People quit early on their medicine. I don't get that.
A lot of people don't like taking medication.
Or something, but that's not, it takes the whole time to really kill it, I think, even if you're feeling better, maybe, doesn't it?
It does.
You need to take the whole thing.
Yeah, because that's the problem now. We have all of these like antibiotic resistant strains of things because people just take enough to feel better, and then it's kind of like it's crazy how smart they can be and kind of adapt themselves so that next time you try to take that penicillin, it's not going to work anymore.
Isn't it incredible how the body works?
It is. It's crazy. So these can be given through the IV, ophthalmic, so through the eyes, or orally, like a pill. So, and these also have severe side effects too. They're kind of hard on your kidneys, and there's let's see, well, you guys have a different book, but there's a thing in your book, like a picture that shows you, okay, I think it's in the back of your book, and it shows you the different kinds of quinolones and all of their side effects. Let's see, Master Essentials Table. There we go. It's not in the back. It's actually in chapter 14. It has some, like the Cipro is on here. But so if you look at that, it's the Master the Essentials Table, and it has different detail on all those medications. And then you have the sulfa medications. Those are one of the earlier classes of antibiotics, and they can interrupt the metabolism of that antibiotic. So that Bactrim or Septra are some examples. A lot of people are allergic to sulfa medications.
I'm allergic to it. I have been for years.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are.
I'm allergic to it.
And there was a question on here that I saw about those. Should have highlighted it. So Bactrim, that's one that they do give people a lot for, but it kind of helps to kill the bacteria. It stops the metabolism of it. And some of the allergic reactions that people have to sulfa would be like a skin reaction, liver and kidney injuries, breathing difficulties, and then a decreased level of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So that's why we pay really close attention to anybody's history with sulfa medications and if they have any allergies. So we always ask everybody before we give anything. Even if it says they, no allergies on there, I still ask them every single time. I see that you're only allergic to penicillin. You don't have any other allergies. And just because, sometimes people develop allergies and maybe it didn't get updated. So, or last time they got a medication and they had a bad allergy and somehow it didn't get in there. So
I have been for years and years, and I never even knew it was that important until I read about this, because I was like, sulfa, what's that, whatever, I don't know.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
Yeah, I just always tell them that, and then I think it's probably no big deal, but a lot of medicines are made out of that. So
Yeah, and then
wow, that is a big thing.
That's another thing where people will always ask them, like, what is your allergy to it? Like, what happened? Did you get a rash or what? And like people that don't know, maybe it happened when they were a kid. They're like, I don't know.
Now it was so many years ago when I was a kid, and I thought it was probably not even important to tell them, but
yeah,
I find out it could really be a bad thing if I took it. So.
Yeah, it could be. Especially if you were to like get it and just go home and take it and you don't have anybody monitoring you or anything,
I didn't even know it was anything, so but they make drugs, all these drugs out of it. So.
Yeah. So then tuberculosis, you don't see that a whole lot anymore around here anyway. But that is one that you have to be on medications for a long period of time. And you usually take more than one. So it says a mixture of 2 to 4 medications simultaneously daily for even up to a whole year. So it's long term. And they help to treat the Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Rifampin, that's one that you usually, if you see any questions about that, it's related to the TB. That's one that treats or prevents TB. That's the one also if somebody in your home or somebody you were exposed to ended up having TB, they would have to treat everyone else like prophylactically to make sure they didn't get it also. And another thing, it turns your body secretions like a red-orange color. That's another thing that I remember seeing somewhere else. So if you see something that says, which medication turns your body secretions red or orange? Rifampin is the one. And it said that tuberculosis was pretty well controlled until the 80s. And then when we had the AIDS, the outbreak of AIDS kind of hit us in the 80s. That kind of makes everybody's immune system weaker when they have that. And so then we saw an increase of tuberculosis after that. And then also all of the traveling and different things. I worked with a lot of nurses when I was travel nursing that were from like the Philippines. They said it's really bad there, that people, die from that all the time because the medications cost so much money. And it's not like it is here where if we go to the hospital, they kind of give us what we need and then we deal with paying for it later. They have to pay for their medication before they get it. So they have these different pharmacies right outside the hospital where you can buy that stuff and just keep it at your bedside. because it's cheaper than buying it from the hospital, I guess. So it's kind of interesting to learn different things, but it's just sad to think about. I guess we are kind of lucky sometimes with that.
Really lucky compared to a lot of those countries.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, because I couldn't imagine, as much as everything costs for them coming in, or I wouldn't even want to be the nurse that goes in there like, well, I have this medication that could save your life, but you need to give me this much money for it.
Away, right. How could you walk away from them and not want to help them all?
It would be really hard.
Yeah.
So they were just saying that really a lot of people don't survive from it because they don't have enough money to. So the antibiotic that's not used in pregnancy because it can stain the teeth. Yep. So if you think they both start with T, like tetracycline teeth.
That's a good idea.
And antitoxins. Some bacterial diseases are caused by the toxins that the bacteria produces. So that would be like the tetanus or botulism. You might have to take an antitoxin, which is antitoxins are antibodies that are created in response to specific toxins. So they can counteract that toxin and help with that condition. So an example would be, like I said, the tetanus or botulism. And you might take something like that Baytet or the tetanus immune globulin. So it immediately neutralizes that tetanus toxoid. So that's kind of also, a lot of times we'll get the tetanus shot to prevent that too. And then, so that tetani can actually live in the soil, and you could get a life-threatening tetanus infection. So that's why we usually give you the tetanus vaccine to prevent it, because it can be life-threatening. And then antifungals, those are for your yeast infections, athlete's foot. It can come in different forms, so you can have the topical, so the miconazole, that usually is like a powder. Sometimes people get a fungal infection in between their skin folds, so maybe their abdominal folds or under their breasts, or like I said, the athlete's foot. That's a big one because your feet are inside these shoes and it's wet, moist, and dark, which is the best way for anything to grow. So you might have to get some of those powders or creams for it, or you could do a systemic medication where it would affect your whole system. So that could also be the fluconazole or the diflucan. I think that's one they give a lot of people for different yeast infections and things too. And then that fungizone is reserved just for a life-threatening fungal infection, so because it has more serious side effects also. So that seems to be the common ground. Everything has side effects. So the fungus can live on your skin or in your body, and it can be a single cell organism or multicellular. So usually we can just fight off the fungal infections, but if our immune system is compromised, so if we have HIV, sometimes our immune system can't fight it off. Also, if you see people that have that thrush, babies get thrush a lot, but then people get it too from taking antibiotics and different things, and they get that white film on their throat. They might do a nystatin. That's another antifungal, and that's one that they usually can swish around and swallow it. It smells really good, but everybody says it does not taste good. I think if it smells good, it should taste good too. But that is true. That is true, especially hospital coffee. I do not recommend it. I always tell people I can make it fresh, but it won't be good. or I can't promise it'll be good. So antivirals, usually a virus is a microorganism that has to have a host to reproduce itself. So the host can be you, the human, or plants or animals. Chickenpox, shingles, influenza, the common cold, herpes, those are all examples of like a viral infection. So you'd have to do an antiviral because the antibiotic's just not going to work for it. So a cyclovir, that's one that they usually do for the herpes, chickenpox, or shingles, and it just kind of helps to decrease the symptoms and kind of reduce the time. Usually our body develops antibodies to fight off those virus or like fight off different microorganisms naturally, but sometimes you need help with it. So that's when you get the antiviral medication. So one way the antiviral medication works is it helps to strengthen your ability to fight that infection. Then you have the Relenza or Tamiflu. That's usually for influenza A or B. Tamiflu is the big one that you see a lot for the influenza. Virazole, that's one they give for hepatitis C virus or RSV also, that ribavirin. RSV, that's for the younger, like babies. They can get that infection. That's considered a viral infection, and it kind of makes them have really like thick mucus and really hard for them to breathe.
How come they can give medications for some of those viruses and other things they'll say it's a virus? There's no medicine for virus. You know?
I think it just depends on the person. If somebody had a good immune system that could fight it off, for say some of the different viruses, then they would just let you kind of fight it off. But people that are more at risk, like if you or me got influenza, we'd probably be okay. Our body would fight it off. We'd be miserable for a while. But people with weak immune systems that are like older or younger or cancer or anything like that, it could kill them. So that's when they're more likely to give people the antiviral stuff.
You know, you think it would be done for viruses. They tell you that. Since
Yeah.
But there are medications for
Yeah,
viruses.
there are. That's a good question, though, because you're right. Usually people are like, well...
They'll tell you, well, it's a virus. There's nothing you can do about it. So.
Wait, how come is it when some people are exposed to, like, you said the, like herpes is a virus. How come when some people can be exposed to it, they'll never have any, it's like they almost like they don't get it, but then the next person does. Is it because they got a stronger immune system? Or
It could
do they
be.
have something that just prevents them from picking up the virus?
Yeah,
I think it's
even...
the same with the wart virus or whatever, like when you get warts on your hands or whatever you get.
And you may have like been exposed to it just briefly enough to where maybe your body was able to get those memories and fight it off, but maybe not long enough to
and then the next person
acquire it. And if you have
you can carry it, right? And then maybe carry it with you, like, you know, be a
yeah, you can without
getting it.
symptoms too,
Yeah, that's
which is kind of
interesting.
scary.
That's so interesting, and you don't really know why that is, huh? I mean, I always kind of wondered that too, how you could carry it but not have it yourself. But there's no real reason. Nobody really knows.
Well, a lot of times, like our immune system, like if our immune system's stronger, then we can fight it off. Whereas, yeah,
you're carrying that virus, sort of.
kind of. Or you may have like the chicken pox where you have that you get that virus and you're always going to have it, but the symptoms go away. And then later in life, you maybe have a really something stressful happen, and then all of a sudden you get shingles from it because you can have like stress can kind of bring it back out too. So it could be, you just maybe it hasn't
That's why they say
shown
if you had it,
symptoms.
you could get shingles. I wondered why, because you're still carrying it in your body. I didn't know that.
That Relenza, that's an inhaled medication, and then the Tamiflu is an oral pill. CMV, infection of the eye, is associated with AIDS, and then the smallpox virus can be treated with that Cytophor. So retroviral, HIV is a retroviral. I know that's another one that let's see, there it is. So a retrovirus, HIV, a lot of people look at that question and they'll just pick like virus because they see, oh, virus is in the name, but it's retrovirus. So it's embedded genetic material in the gene of healthy cells, and so it's really difficult to fight. So antiretroviral would be a medication for retroviruses like HIV. So retroviruses are a little bit different because they have a RNA blueprint. So they synthesize the DNA, and it's like the opposite of your normal body process. There we go. So medications are classified according to where they produce and what they do. Some of them, you have the protease inhibitors, the fusion inhibitors, entry inhibitors, HIV integrase strand transfer inhibitors. So it just kind of depends on what they do. Because with HIV, it attacks our T4 or CD4 cells, and those are like our soldiers that we were talking about, like the defense soldiers. So we're kind of like powerless when it attacks that. And then it just kind of keeps reproducing. So if the medications, like I said, it's the RNA to the DNA process, and they include all of those, like the NRTIs, NNRTIs, and again, there's a table for that in our book too, that kind of goes through all of the different medications. Let's see, is this, here it is. On mine it's 340, 341. That has all the antibiotics, and it has first, second, third generation. It has side effects, and then there are antiretrovirals on 343. So side effects would be like upset your stomach. Sometimes they cause low blood sugar, kidney stones, and they can be more sensitive if you have like kidney or liver implant or impairments, or you're breastfeeding, and you can't have any alcohol with them. And then it just kind of names off the different like NRTIs. That Combivir, I know that's one that I've seen. Retrovir, that's another one. So just different types of antiretroviral medications. And then antiparasitic, that's for the little parasites that make us like itch when we just talk about them. So parasite is an organism that lives on or in another organism, which is the host. And so that's like the malaria, the worms, the lice, the scabies, everything we don't want to think about. So they prevent, anti-malarials prevent and treat malaria, so that's pretty easy. Malaria, anti-malarial, and so those are some examples of that Malarone, which also sounds like malaria, so if you say all three of those 3 times fast. The chloroquine, that's another one I've seen. So those are just some examples of the antiparasitics, and then you have antiprotozoals, which is like the flagell. That's a big one that you see a lot, the metronidazole. Or then you have Bactrim again, or the Septra, that can help with kind of the protozoal infections too. And you can do them IV or by mouth, and it disrupts the strands of the DNA. So that a vaginal infection would be the giardiasis. Trichomonas is another type of vaginal infection. And then pneumocystis is a pulmonary disease that usually happens with people that have AIDS. So a lot of times when people have like something that affects their immune system like AIDS, it's not the AIDS that usually kills them, it's the infection that they can get because they're so susceptible to infections. So a lot of them, that pneumocystis, that's a big one that people get that can kind of be really bad. So if you have a tapeworm, you might have to take this Albenza medication. A roundworm, you might have to take Stromectol, or a pinworm or fluke, you might take that Vermox. So these type of medications paralyze the nervous system of like the worm system and prevent glucose absorption. So that's just really fun to think about.
Gross, I know. They don't belong to that.
Yeah, because the roundworms, they enter your tissue and then they're kind of difficult to kill. So we don't want that. Of course, I remember reading like a long time ago about this like tapeworm diet that people were taking those and then they get really skinny and lose all this weight, and I'm just like, is it really worth that? Ugh, so gross.
Do we get roundworms just by walking in the yard, or are they around here? If they go through your skin.
They're around here. I get kids will
Get roundworms?
Yeah, I think it's more of a kid thing, like the tapeworm especially. I know that a lot of times they'll put something, because they'll come out of like their rectum. So they'll put like some tape or something there so they stick to it, because they might do that at night. I would just feel so bad if that happened. It probably happened to my kid because she's the one out there playing in the dirt every day.
Yeah, well, like roundworm, it can go through your skin.
I think, like when Brianna was little, they were saying that be careful with your sandbox, because like coons and stuff can come and
And
they'll
cats
use
and
it.
whatnot. And
They stick their fingers in their mouth and they eat.
Yeah.
Sometimes smaller kids will eat dirt or.
Well,
Yeah.
that might be tapeworm things, sort of like.
That's
But
true.
I think you can get them similar. I think you can.
We used to do really weird stuff when I was a kid, which
But
now
if you
I've
go
like.
barefoot all the time.
Oh yes.
They
Well,
go through your skin, like you said, or. Skin?
I mean, they invade your tissues, but I don't know that it would necessarily like go through your skin. It could if you had like an open cut or something, I guess.
That could be
But-
very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. I'm sorry. Sorry for stopping.
That's
there.
okay. That's like you always see the TV shows they have, like they went swimming in some weird place in some other country or something
Yeah.
and got this weird parasite or
Because I know some parasites in other countries can go up through your feet.
yeah.
I do know that. I just wondered if we
I
had
have
them
seen
here.
where she's talking about swimming, they go through the urethra.
Yeah.
Do they?
Yeah, and it like swims up there.
Oh
Oh,
my
When you're in the
God.
water.
so scary.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad I have this class after lunch.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Now, that's something to think about in a lake or something. That's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like everybody's gonna get it, but then there's that one, there's a possibility.
No swimming in Lake Story. No. I do see a lot of people swimming there.
I know.
It could be beautiful if they, but I don't know. You know, you just want to make sure it's taken good care of, I guess.
But a lake's a lake, I mean, there's fish and everything in it, so how can you?
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
I guess you just take your chances, because most people probably think it's not.
You need like an artificial lake. Like there's one by my dad's house we walked to, and it was like so pretty blue. I was like, this is the kind of lake I would swim in.
Right. I know.
So then if you have lice, which are little parasites that live on your blood, and they kind of live in either your scalp or your pubic areas or like your body, and they just kind of feast on your blood there, you might have to have a pediculicide. So that could be like a shampoo or lotion, and it attacks the nervous system of the lice and like suffocates them. A lot of times you can get like that permethrin over the counter, but of course we're talking about all these like super things. Now they have like a super lice that the over the counter might not fix. And so you might have to go to the doctor and get like a prescription one. And they can be, yes, it's so scary. So they can, yeah, super nice.
So they come up with new inventions. There's not one around here, but since my kid is in school age, but there was a place in I want to say the Quad Cities or whatever. It was like specifically go there to treat it because most places don't, but they use these machines that have like a vacuum and heat.
Oh.
Yeah, because it was to get rid of the super lice because
Oh wow. Well, and the heat would kind of kill them too.
And then it had like it was like a tool that had like a vacuum hose to it and then a heat, and they would just like put it through their hair.
That would kind of be nice for like.
But it took more than one. No, it took like more than one treatment, I guess. Just like regular, because you got to make sure you get it all.
And it's so prevalent. I mean, lice.
Oh yeah.
Oh gosh, just working there, they have it all. Kids have it all the time.
I get so worried about that because my daughter has the curliest hair, and
super lice now you can worry.
Because you have to comb through it, and I'm just like, she can't even tolerate getting her hair combed on a normal day, let alone.
Right.
With that.
Or coconut oil. I was told that if you get like coconut oil and put it in their hair, then it prevents. You're not necessarily gonna keep your kids from getting it, but it is a deterrent. Like it won't.
Yeah, they like really.
I've also heard like tea tree oil.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard that too.
Because I have like some tea tree oil shampoo and conditioner, and I was like,
that's a good idea.
I'm always like, if I go to the hospital and I have somebody with lice, I'm like, you could have let me know ahead of time. I would have doused myself with some tea tree oil.
Right.
The tea tree oil my daughter can't use because of her allergies.
Oh, well that would work then. Yeah, I just go to work with like my hair caked with the coconut oil and the tea tree oil. Nothing. No, because then they give me everybody that had the lice.
At home, I put a few drops in my shampoo and conditioner.
Yeah.
That's my daughters have long hair now.
That is a
So
idea.
It helps prevent
Yes.
The tea tree oil does.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good of an idea. Wow.
And then, so they can be neurotoxic, so we don't want to use them more than what's directed. Hopefully you can use it and get rid of it. And then that's why it's so important to like make sure you treat all the clothing and the bedding and get rid of everything else that you can't treat and put outside or put it in these bags. So tie it up tight, because you don't want to get it again and have to take that medication again. So scabicides are for scabies, and
It's getting better.
yes, and we talked about those. So those are those itch mites, and they burrow into the webbing of your fingers and toes, and they're spread through contact. And you have to also treat your bedding and people that have been around you too. And scabies is like really hard to get rid of, they say. And they have some other form. I don't even remember what it was called. I feel like they said this is English scabies, or it was some other form that didn't show all the same symptoms, and I'm just like, what?
Oh, no.
Yes, super scabies, super lice. So the type of medication that is used to treat worms. Yes. Good job. I guess we could try to talk about vaccines real quick. And then hopefully you guys can get a little break. It just goes so fast in this class.
So many weeks. The test will do after lab or?
I can give it to people for like if they want to do it and while I go get the stuff out, I was kind of thinking we could do that way too.
Okay.
Yes. That way, because if people have to leave like right after lab or something, then that would. Oh, okay. You're here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I guess maybe we will stop. But, well, you guys can take a break and
When is our last class?
May 7th.